This is the BBC.
Hello and welcome. This is another Confessions podcast from your friends at Radio 2. BBC Radio 2. Somehow means more if there's a jingle to go with it. Yeah, so we have another audio array of terrible tales from the very sinful Radio 2 listener, all seeking forgiveness from the juggernauts of justice. This week's concise collection features Papercrack Fighter, Brothers in Harm, Every Picture Tells a Story, and So Good to Be Back Home Again. They're the four stories, and here they come. By the sound of the purveyors of penitence, I am writing to seek forgiveness for a sin that took place at a time and place that are close to Simon's heart. Although obviously I am in no way seeking favourable treatment. The year is 1983, and the setting is the magnificent and venerable seat of learning that is the University of Warwick. And it is certainly true. That was my place of learning, although I had left by this time. It was only just. It was my first year at university, and I was living in one of the university's on-campus halls of residence, known as Kirby Lodge. It's known as Kirby Lodge because that's what its name is. This accommodation was ideally situated a reasonably short walk or trolley ride from the Students' Union building. The use of trolley there is a Sainsbury's trolley, because people used to go over to Sainsbury's, get the trolley, and then use that as a form of public transport.
And take it back, of course.
Yes.
In theory.
In the days
Yes.
before they put the things on to stop them.
At the time, there wasn't a deposit, so a lot of them ended up as sculptures. This is not good behaviour, obviously, and that's a very bad thing. Now, some of you may know, being in a hall of residence does, of course, raise the spectre of inconsiderate behaviour by one's fellow students. In this case, the guy in the room next to me, along the corridor, called Alex, had taken to playing his music extremely loud. That in itself is not an unusual occurrence on university campuses, but Alex chose to leave the door of his room wide open and to sing at the top of his very booming but not very tuneful voice. On the first couple of occasions, Alex was asked very politely to desist from his performances, but to no avail. It was at this point that the plan was hatched. Initially, it involved waiting until Alex was asleep in his room, often fueled by a few lemonades from the various bars in the nearby Students' Union. Once Alex was asleep, we would completely cover the outside of the doorframe to his room with newspaper, a common student activity which, for reasons I have never been able to fathom, seemed like one of the funniest activities of all time. The following morning, when Alex awoke, he would open the door to his room, inwards, of course, to be met by a wall of darkness created by copies of various newspapers. I would like to claim it was made up of pages taken from the Times, Financial Times and Wall Street Journal, but probably was the New Musical Express, Melody Maker and Sounds, and the Warwick Ball, which is the student newspaper. He would then simply break through the paper and go about his day. So far, so innocuous. However, our light-hearted and fairly innocent prank, plus further polite request to please quieten down, or words to that effect, did not convince Alex to cease his tuneless shouting at all hours. What did become apparent over the course of a few repeated paperings in, which we often stood outside just to hear Alex sigh, "Oh, not again," before bursting out of his paper prison, was that Alex was now prone to leap out through the wall of paper in a kind of ta-da, look at me kind of way. He was starting to enjoy it. And it was this change of escape method that led us to modify our approach in a way that ultimately leads to this request for forgiveness. One night, after yet another murdering of a classic early 80s tune, we decided that Alex needed to be taught a lesson. So this time, having papered him into his room, we placed on its end and directly against the paper barricade the table from the hall common room. Our thinking was, fairly obviously, that Alex would leap through the paper in his now traditional ta-da, look at me kind of way and bash his shoulder against the table, leading only to some minor pain but hopefully some major embarrassment. Next morning, a few of us broke the habit of all students' lifetimes and got up quite early in order to watch Alex's painful attempt to escape. After a while, we heard movements in his room and prepared ourselves for our moment of hilarity. After a couple of minutes, we heard Alex's door open and we waited for the shoulder barge that we were longing for. Alas, Alex decided that it was now time to employ a different method of escape, and we heard him channel his inner Hong Kong Phooey and let out a cartoon shriek.
When the going gets rough, he's super tough with a Hong Kong Phooey chop.
He then punched the paper as hard as he could. That's him punching the paper, fist clenched, as hard as he could, expecting, of course, to break through in a triumphant victory over our little wheeze. However, Alex's shriek had failed to engender him with the actual powers of Hong Kong Phooey, who was a dog, if you remember, who could do a bit of Hong Kong Phooey. And the next noise we all heard was a rather excruciating cracking sound as Alex's right hand connected with the paper-concealed table. There followed more shrieking, although not so much cartoon as blasphemic. I don't even know if that's a word, but we kind of get the idea. And whilst this was happening, we took the opportunity to rush back to our rooms and act all innocent. Now, you remember that I said Kirby Lodge was close to the Students' Union. Well, at the other end of the block was the campus medical centre. This turned out to be very handy for Alex because his punch into the table had indeed fractured his hand.
No.
I said it was painful. And if you've got a broken bone in the house at the moment, as we have then, this is doubly painful. So, Father Simon, I now seek you the forgiveness of yourself and the absolutely definitely not underlings. Not from Alex, though, who only had himself to blame for not heeding our requests to turn down the volume on his music and singing. Not from my fellow students, who in Alex's mind remained saddled for the rest of our first year at university with collective blame for a crime they did not commit. But from all the staff at the campus medical centre, who had to plaster up Alex's hand without sighing at yet another story of a student prank that had gone just a little bit too far. Well, it is true that those pranks at the time feel as though they're the most hilarious things that you've ever seen. I think we found out. I don't know quite what they were expecting to happen, Bobby. If you're expecting him to charge out, he could have charged out head first and gone into the table. Anyway, I don't want to steal your thunder.
Well, that's the thing. The thing is, I love your tenacity, Nigel. This is great. And of course, you ramp it up, you make the paper even more thicker and it was more difficult. But what you don't do is you don't set up a difficult injury. It could have been his head. The other thing was that his writing hand. Because I think
what I was thinking,
in 1983,
yes.
we didn't do computers, did we? We did pens and paper. So it might have made his study even more difficult, which is not fair for a man who's obviously trying to study. I say, I love the prank, but you know what? The table, one step too far. Nigel, you are not forgiven.
Not forgiven. Let's see how Carthy's shaping up here, Carthy.
Well, a couple of things that it makes me think of. First is that we do an awful lot of karaoke, so we're the people that get told off for making all that noise, and that people might actually have been quite annoyed with us doing that. And a friend of mine at university who did fall into the pond and crack his head open in the first year. Mm-hmm. And that was quite a long hospital visit, have to say. In the third year, the master of the college did actually mention, do you know that somebody in the first year fell in the pond and cracked their head open to the same person without realising that it was them? So these injuries happen quite a lot at university.
You're pretty disreputable kind of journalist.
It's the kind of thing that can happen quite easily. I'm quite torn on this one, but I am going to say forgiven.
BBC Radio 2.
Father Simon and the collective denizens of delightful forgiveness. My confession involves myself, my 3 brothers, and our sainted mother-in-law in mid-1970s Birmingham. We lived on an estate with a big post-industrial field behind it, which was a perfect place to make the long summers fly by. We will call the brothers Brother A, that's me, the oldest, then brothers B, C and D. Brother D features only in passing, as he is much younger than A, B and C, having been a happy accident. Anyway, I digress. There'll be a few other people listening thinking, no, I think I might have been happy. There was a long gap. I wonder if maybe I should ask. Probably not. Anyway, picture the scene. Brothers A, B and C are out playing on the field with friends. We were playing Cowboys and Indians, unenlightened times, Father Simon, and had been playing for hours. The sun was hot and bright, the homemade bows and arrows were twanging well, and the tatty old bit of rope had been deployed appropriately, with Brother C tied to a handy tree. Because that's what you did. You got a rope, you got a sibling, tie him to the tree. Everything was just as it should be, and so far so good. Now, at this point, I ought to mention the bell. This was, and still is, a huge brass bell which our father had brought back home from work one day. No idea why, but the bell had its uses come lunch and dinner time. I should explain that we children, Father Simon, were essentially feral. We would head out enthusiastically at 9 o'clock in the morning, run around playing cowboys or war or aliens, sometimes look at the strange magazines that inexplicably turned up on the fields. They were puzzling magazines which we couldn't work out.
No idea what he's talking about.
But even feral kids need fuel, and this is where the bell came in. Our sainted mother used to stand at the bottom of the garden, enthusiastically ringing her massive brass bell, and like good Pavlovian dogs, we would come running for our egg and chips. This day was no different. We heard the bell and we took off at speed. You had to move fast, you see. If you weren't quick enough, there was a clear and present risk that another brother would devour your egg and chips. Mum tried her best to fight off the faster sibling, but often to no effect. So when you heard the bell, you ran. We made it back to the kitchen in no time flat, and the feeding frenzy started. It was then that our sainted mother uttered the seemingly innocent question, "Where is Brother C?" Brother B looked at me, I looked at Brother B, and in a heartbeat, you had to move fast or you would trip Mother's finely tuned suspicion tripwire. Brother B and I realised two things. One, Brother C was still tied to the tree. And two, most importantly, there was a plate of egg and chips going.
Oh, a dilemma.
In a nanosecond, Brother B said, Brother C has gone to his friend's house. They have bacon there.
Oh.
Now, this was a truly brilliant move. Bacon made the logic of going elsewhere perfect, and Mother bought it. Whilst he was talking, I used the time to divvy up the spare plate of egg and chips. I got the egg, I was the eldest, so there, and Brother B got most of the chips. We quickly finished the food, grabbed some bread to bribe Brother C with, and scarpered. We heard Mother muttering darkly about those rich folk that could afford bacon, probably from Solihull, most likely. It was that bad. And we left. They always eat bacon in Solihull. They can afford anything. After some bribery, threats, bread, and the passage of a few hours, we managed to explain to Brother C why he needed to stay quiet. We also said that if he told on us, we'd tell everyone that he secretly loved Tracy Betteridge from Balsall Heath. This appeared to be all the ammunition that we needed. Once the promise of silence had been extracted, we released him and carried on playing and reading until the bell for tea time was heard. Myself and Brother B silently made a decision never to allow ourselves to be tied to a tree. It's not a bad thing, really, to aim for. And we knew the element of retribution was a real possibility. Brother C is a good guy, but we all knew he's still waiting to get his own back. Even now, some 40 years later, he's desperate to get us on a tree with a bit of rope. I therefore, but not like being, I seek forgiveness, Father Simon, not from Brother C, who was not the sharpest tool in the box, I have to say, says Andy, digging a little further, nor from our sainted mother, who must have had nerves of steel raising 4 boys on a council estate in South Birmingham in the 1970s. Now, it's actually Brother D who I feel needs a mention. He's a decade younger, and he missed out on the 1970s shenanigans. Later, he also paid dearly for having 3 curious older brothers in an age with no internet. Curiosity needs to be serviced with experimentation. The lemon curd in the belly button incident will need to be the subject of another confession. That may well be the punchline. Anyway. So I implore you to forgive, for it is the way we help to bring up Brother D. Well, Andy, tell of 4 siblings growing up in Birmingham in the 1970s with a brother who seemed to get strapped to a tree. With a few threats, he stayed quiet for 40 years. Anyway, let's see what Sister Bobby makes of that.
What I love about this is it's really idyllic, isn't it? It's absolutely perfect. I love the way that your mum went, look, I'm not shouting you for hours. I'm going to get a bell and this is going to work. And I love the way you all came running, and that's fantastic. Except for poor Brother C, who's tied to the rope, no doubt with a dog lead or a skipping rope or something like that. That's what I was always tied to. I feel...
What? You were tied?
Well, you know when you're playing as kids, you find... we didn't have rope. You'd have a bit of skipping rope or the dog lead or something you'd have hang.
So you get tied up with a dog lead?
Well, not now, obviously.
No, but you did.
Different times. Anyway, moving on rather quickly. What I was going to say with this, Andy, I loved it. However, I have been at the end of
the rope.
I've been in this situation and missed out with someone bigger than me, or someone that would sit on me, and then I couldn't tell because they'd be in big trouble with Mum and Dad, so you could never tell on them either, and that used to really always annoy me. So I think there's a little bit of a personal thing here. Andy, you are not forgiven for being a meanie and eating his dinner.
Hey kids, don't tie your siblings to trees.
No.
Carthy?
Equally thought it was idyllic. We've already gone back to my childhood with the frog chorus and playing with trees and not phones, so I like them because that's actually something that kids just don't do anymore, is it? Also back to Solihull, Balsall Heath, areas that I know of from the West Midlands. Andy, brother A, if it's taken brother C 40 years to not actually get revenge on you, then I don't think he's particularly bothered, because in our family you take revenge within a week, so absolutely forgiven.
Dear Father Simon, every year, as the summer holidays approach and keen photographers nationwide polish their lenses and pack their camera bags, preparing to capture stunning scenery, dramatic sunsets and family fun, I feel a sense of guilt for an action committed by me as a young, aspiring photography student with a holiday job in the summer of 1986. For the second summer in a row, I'd been taken on by the 1-hour photo lab in Swindon to process thousands of holiday snaps. It was a great arrangement because it meant I had a job that suited me. It's not about that. It's not going to be about that. It's not.
I think we've both gone to the same place, haven't we?
It's not. Well, there may well be others about that. It may well be that bit has been taken out of this one, but it's not about that. It was a great arrangement because it meant that I had a job that suited me and paid well. So it'd be fair to say I was a little bit cocksure, a little bit certain of myself. The only problem I had was dealing with the shop's trickiest customers, the know-it-all types, the amateurs. These people, in my experience, spend their entire lives at air shows or standing at the end of railway platforms, using up endless supplies of film, taking pictures of planes or trains, usually very badly. So, Matt, you're already making it very difficult for yourself, David, by the way. So imagine the scene one afternoon after the lunchtime rush when in walked one of the regular know-it-all amateurs. In fact, it was the one we dreaded most. He had the loudest voice and the most boring stories. However, on this occasion, he looked a little awkward as he approached the counter. I've got a problem with one of my I've got a problem with one of my films, he said. It's that I was just trying.
Well, that was quite good.
I was just trying. Well, I was going to do like a whiny Peter Cook voice, but then I've got a problem with one of my films, he said. It snapped inside the camera as I was winding it on during my niece's wedding.
That sounds a bit wrong.
Aww.
That really isn't a problem, I quickly assured him. We have a special light-tight cabinet. I can put your camera in, take your film out safely before transferring it to a special container, allowing us to process your film in the normal manner. This kind of thing happens quite a lot. You really, really don't need to worry, I say. In a I know exactly what I'm doing kind of reply, Mr. Know-It-All explained that he'd already taken the film out of the camera himself and put it safely into one of those little plastic canisters that 35mm film used to come in. OK, I said, no problem. As long as the room that you were in, that you extracted the film in, was pitch black, you should be absolutely fine. I did it in the kitchen. He said it was quite dark in there. In that instant, I realised we had a big problem on our hands because Mr. Know-It-All clearly didn't understand the photographic meaning of pitch black. When you say dark, I ventured, do you mean the room was pitch black, no light at all? Yes, it was very dark. I even twisted the slats of the blinds closed. Before? No, during. Otherwise I couldn't see. I'm not that stupid. What time of day did you do this? It was about 7:30. I don't think the kitchen would have been quite dark enough. It was, he snapped. Oh, it was. He was very angry. He then produced the canister with the film in it, and to my utter disbelief, it wasn't in one of these solid black containers used by Kodak. It was one of the clear plastic types used by Fuji. And you could see Mr. Know-It-All's film all in there unscrolled. Look, I said, your film will be badly fogged because I can see your film in the canister. That means light is getting through the plastic and it's ruining your film. Overhearing this terse exchange, Bill, the mild-mannered manager, oh, another voice, had left the printing machine to join us at the counter. Is there anything... No, same voice. Just exactly the same voice. Is there anything I can help with, David? Bill inquires. Mr. Know-It-All then relays his story again, at which point I pipe up. Go on, Bill, tell him that his film is going to be completely fogged and ruined. He should really have brought the camera in here for us to take it out properly. Well, my man and Bill really wasn't that interested in photography, and certainly not the technicalities. His job was to make sure the shop pay and keep the customers coming back. A confident young photography student, i.e. me, trying to score points off one of his customers, him, was not just what he wanted. He knew that Mr. Know-It-All was a very good customer, and that was actually the bottom line. As Bill then proceeded to explain away my behaviour as youthful enthusiasm and assured Mr. Know-It-All we'd have his prints ready within the hour, I felt, I have to tell you, very let down, especially when Mr. Know-It-All looked down at me with a get back in your place, kiddo kind of expression and sneer all over his face. Once he was out of the door, I said to Bill, why didn't you tell him that his film is fogged? Shall we see then, said Bill. He tossed me the film to process. It's got important pictures on it, he says. Let's do the best we can for him. Grudgingly, I put the film into the light-tight cabinet and then put my hands in to transfer the film to one of our special canisters in the dark. While I'm winding the film into the canister, a little seed of doubt was being sown, and I started to question myself. Maybe the kitchen had been dark enough. Maybe Mr. Know-It-All did actually know it all. What would happen if there was something on the film after all? And I started to feel sick. The utter humiliation would surely shatter my confidence and mark the end of any hope I had of becoming a professional photographer. But what could I do? There was only one thing.
No.
Quickly, quietly and deftly, I pulled one of my hands out of the light-tight cabinet, undid the clasps that locked it shut. Then, with my free hand, I pulled the cabinet open, grabbed the film, now loose film, lifted it out of the light-tight cabinet, and out of sight of Bill, I introduced the film to natural daylight by waving it around once, twice, 3 times in front of the big shop window. After a good 10-second exposure, and now fully satisfied the film would be ruined, I put the film back and locked the cabinet shut. I returned my free hand into the cabinet and continued as if nothing had happened. I rolled the film into one of our special containers and popped it into the processing machine. The rest is history. As I'd confidently predicted, the film did come out black. Just as I told Mr. Know-It-All it actually would. Afterwards, my boss Bill was reassured that I did know what I was talking about. Ha-ha. And Mr. Know-It-All, well, we never saw him again. He did come in to collect his film, but perhaps worried he might look a tiny bit stupid in front of a kid, he returned when I wasn't there. Most importantly, though, my confidence wasn't shattered, and I went on to finish college and to become an award-winning professional photographer.
Oh.
How about that?
There you go.
However, I beg your forgiveness, so much for karma, eh? However, I beg your forgiveness not for what Mr. Know-It-All might have lost, pictures and with any luck his aloofness, and not for my dear mild-mannered Bill either, who'd not put any trust in me anyway and employed me and possibly lost one of his most lucrative customers. Instead, I ask for forgiveness from Mr. Know-It-All's niece and her husband, who now approaching their 31st wedding anniversary don't have a set of special memories of their special day to look back on and show their children. Well, always assuming that there was something there. It's certainly true that David, obviously this is a non de plus, that David has ruined some wedding photographs just to save his skin. I don't think this is going to go very well for you, David. Sister Bobby has a stern face on.
You're exactly right. I'm really disappointed. Really disappointed.
You let us down, David.
So many opportunities to do the right thing. I love the son of your boss, by the way, Bill. He's absolutely
Mild-mannered Bill.
got it sorted. The customer's always right. And I know your Mr. Know-It-All was absolutely annoying, and I would have felt exactly the same. Is you missed an opportunity because just there was a chance that actually they could have been saved or something could have been saved. And actually the real loser is his lovely niece, which, as you have noted, and that's not fair, and you could have avoided that. You could have avoided that. You could have got a great opportunity to actually learn something that actually it's not maybe disaster. So in the briefest way, you are not forgiven, David Bailey. You
Carthy.
Disappointed us.
What are you saying? Stern Carthy too, I think.
Holiday job, it is all about learning. It's about finding out how you can help other people in this particular job. And David Bailey, 30 years ago, I can't believe wedding, of all the occasions, wedding photos, they are so precious. I have to say, this is a really easy one for me. Humiliation versus someone's life's best moment. You go for humiliation. Absolutely not forgiven.
Not forgiven.
BBC Radio 2.
Father Simon and the Confessional Collective, your recent discussion of frogs brought back to mind a little story which I've kept close to my chest for many a long year, although I have told it to a few dear friends who have been trusted and sworn to secrecy. This is our story that we did about frogs going back to the pond in which they were born, and because they had their own homing device, which I didn't know about. In the late 1990s, my family and I moved to a little seaside village in Wales, which must remain nameless for the purposes of this story. Our children, who were aged 14, 10 and 6, were enthralled by the many wonders of their new environment and the freedom they enjoyed exploring the seashore, the cliffs and the fields. They delighted in the animals, both in the local farmyard and on the moors, as well as the wildlife. One of the first things that we discovered following our arrival was that there was frog spawn and frogs in the garden pond, because yes, the frogs knew where they had been spawned and had returned to continue nature's marvellous cycle, much as we heard about a few days ago. How thrilled we all were to monitor the progress of the frog spawn, admire the tadpoles, and then delight in the tiny frogs and know that they'll be coming back one day. Chatting around the table one evening, each person allowed to contribute to the conversation provided he or she had possession of the talking fork. Has anyone else done this? You're only allowed to speak if you got the talking fork?
Well, yes, it's the only thing we have in the Pink Flamingo Club, isn't it? We always have a talking fork.
On the same wavelength.
Have you got one, Carthy?
No, never heard of it.
Bobby, when you were growing up? Well,
Really?
Obviously, this is the way to bring up kids. You can only speak if you got the talking fork. The topic turned to homing animals. How come the frogs had found their way back to our garden? What other animals did this? So we referred to swallows and martins and migrating birds and, of course, homing snails. A certain incredulity greeted this piece of information, much as you just heard from that raspberry. So to prove my point, we went out into the garden, and it wasn't too long before we found a snail, the bane of my keen gardener husband's life. He was quick to tell us. I then took some Tipp-Ex, marked a big white dot on the snail's shell to identify it, then took it across the road and left it in the field over the way. It was 4 days later when I was able to call the children excitedly into the garden. There, ta-da! I told you, it's come back to our garden. It's the homing snail. And there were gasps, Father Simon. There were gasps of excitement and astonishment, and it's fair to say the children were mightily impressed and amazed and, of course, thrilled that the homing snail had indeed made its way back to our garden, out of the field, across the road and into our garden. Me, well, I was smug and self-satisfied, and from then on, my wisdom and knowledge about the countryside and animals were respected, and I was never questioned again. Yeah. What I didn't say, and to this moment have never confessed to the children, not until now, is that after putting the homing snail across the road, I had, of course, immediately found another snail, popped a spot of Tipp-Ex on its shell, and carefully placed it among the flower pots to be discovered 4 days later. Because, as all adults know, and a lot of non-duped children too, there are, of course, no excuse me,
It's all right.
no such things as homing snails. But in my defence, Father Simon, I was merely acting in the spirit that sometimes seizes parents who are tired of telling the truth. And we're tired of setting an example. You know the type of thing. Come away from that mirror, you'll wear it out. Or, yes, you can get Chardonnay on prescription. Imagine that. I am genuinely, says Jackie, genuinely ashamed for myself and for my friends who have delighted in this tale over the years, roaring with delight, wiping away tears of laughter and enjoying a certain connivance. It's a sorry tale of how mothers can abuse the trust that their children place in them, when they should in fact always be telling the truth as they guide them along life's narrow path. To this day I've never owned up and have steadfastly maintained the fiction. In fact, I'm now wondering whether to repeat this trick with my grandchildren, but tempting as that is, that might blow the original story out of the water. I don't actually wish to ask forgiveness from my children, who I so cruelly tricked, because this story has given me so many laughs over the years, nor do I wish to be shriven for what I did to the snail. No, I need to be forgiven from all the other poor snails that were painted and transported over the road by our naive children in fruitless attempts to find another homing snail. They eventually gave up, returning to their Game Boys, to my husband's mild disappointment, since they were helping to rid the garden of the hated gastropods. But it was a good laugh, and I never told the kids big porkies. Well, not very big ones anyway. Lots of love from Jackie with a story of the homing snail, a little bit of Tipp-Ex. I always like a confession that has been... the truth has been hidden until the very moment that we've revealed it. So we brought you 2 exclusives. 1, new track from Mick Jagger. 2, Jackie's homing snail was a lie. Sister Bobby.
I love this. I love the homing snails because it's one we can try at home, isn't it, and share. So thank you for that. I think it's great fun. I would say no real harm done. There's only one disclaimer I want to put on this, or one little point, which is I love all of this. I think really there's no real victims. It's just a bit of fun. And of course, it's very easy to kind of just search engine if it's true. They could have found out the truth if they really wanted to know later on.
I think this is before any of that.
Okay, all right. So before encyclopedias and everything.
The
okay.
1990s.
There's only one little thing, and that's don't put them on the other side of the road, because if actually genuinely they were,
but they're not,
because do we know that? We don't know they're not, do we?
They're not homing snails.
No, they don't.
Road.
Yeah, I just don't want them. Just we just still need them. We don't like them flattened. That's all. So
fine.
Yes, have fun, but not across the road. Forgiven, Jackie.
Novice Nigel.
I would be more worried about the 6-year-old taking them across the road on the basis they're going to home back to the house. But I don't think children or the truth should get in the way of a good jape. And Jackie, do tell your husband that British snails are some of the finest eating in the world. Those common brown ones, the big ones that look the size of a squash ball, but don't taste anything like as rubbery. They're fantastic. And you can farm them, feed them on rocket or carrot, whatever you want, and you'll get the flavour through. Don't do them in garlic, do them with sage. There you go.
Extraordinary talent you have.
So I just think, that's a great story. No harm done, because they weren't going to get run over, were they, the snails? But the frogs and toads, they would have done. So on this occasion, Jackie, absolutely forgiven.
So a confessions verdict and a serving suggestion as well, which is a first. Carthy.
Yeah, I don't have the culinary skills of Nigel. I don't have the qualms about snails that Bobby has. I think it's a parent's prerogative to be able to do that. Tell them any kind of story that you want. It's like the ice cream van plays music.
Very good.
Because they've sold out of ice cream.
That's the one. Lying to your kids. Matt would be proud of you, Carthy. Well, they were this week's confessions. Let us know if you forgave anyone at all. I suspect you might have done most of them, but maybe not the last one. If you have a story for us, it's confessions@bbc.co.uk. And if you missed any of the shows this week, you can listen back online or download to your smartphone or tablet from the BBC iPlayer radio app. Monday, the multi-million selling author Kathy Reichs came in to talk about a long-running Temperance Brennan series and her brand new heroine who relishes in the name of Sunday Night. That's really cool. Sunday Night, that's her name. Big Old Tunes Day on Tuesday with big songs from Kansas, Jackson Browne, David Gray and the much-missed Guramal. On Wednesday, we had Justin Hayward in talking about his solo tour and his time with the Moody Blues. Foodie Thursday with Nigel talking about nettle fritters and why on earth you'd pair them with marinated sirloin steaks. And if you made it to the end of last week's podcast, you were tweeting, "What's Game of Thrones got to do with anything, Nige?" It made sense in the context of last week. Thank you to Michelle Robinson and Ed Ross and Scott Tucker and Anne Robson and Tunza and many more who did precisely that. This week's top secret code phrase is, "Why the big gap, Big Sean?" That is very annoying, isn't it?
88 to 90.